February 22nd, 1968, London, Ontario, Canada. The stage lights dim at the Gardens Arena. 15,000 people hold their breath. Johnny Cash stands center stage, guitar in hand, but he's not looking at the audience. His eyes are locked on a woman standing in the wings, her dark hair catching the spotlight, her fingers nervously clutching a piece of sheet music. He's done this 17 times before. 17 times he's asked her to marry him. 17 times she said no. But tonight is different. Tonight the world is watching. June Carter feels her heart hammering against her ribs. She knows what's coming. She can see it in his eyes, in the way his fingers tremble slightly on the guitar strings. The man in black is about to do something that will change both their lives forever. This is the story of how Johnny Cash won the heart of the woman who saved his life. And it didn't happen in private. It happened in front of 15,000 strangers, broadcast across North America, with everything on the line. By 1968, Johnny Cash was climbing back from the abyss. Just 2 years earlier, he'd been a ghost of himself, a skeletal figure weighing barely 155 pounds, addicted to amphetamines and barbiturates, destroying everything he touched. His first marriage to Vivian Liberto had imploded. His career was circling the drain. He was, by his own admission, as low as a human being can get. But there was June. Always June. They'd met in 1956, backstage at the Grand Ole Opry. She was from country music royalty, the daughter of Mother Mabel Carter, part of the legendary Carter family. He was the new kid with the deep voice and the hollow eyes, still grieving his brother Jack, still trying to outrun demons he couldn't name. The attraction was instant, dangerous, impossible. June was married. Johnny was married. Both were devout Christians who knew exactly what they were doing and exactly why they shouldn't be doing it. But when they sang together, when their voices intertwined on Jackson or It Ain't Me Babe, something electric happened. The audience could feel it. Their spouses could feel it. God himself could probably feel it. But here's what most people don't know. June didn't want Johnny Cash. Not the version of him that was self-destructing in slow motion, showing up to concerts too drugged to perform, kicking out stage lights, getting arrested in places like El Paso and Starkville. She'd already been through 2 divorces. She'd seen what addiction could do. And Johnny Cash, as talented and magnetic as he was, represented everything she was trying to avoid. It was June who wrote Ring of Fire, though she gave the credit to Merle Kilgore. The lyrics weren't subtle. I fell into a burning ring of fire. I went down, 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 and the flames went higher. This wasn't a love song. This was a confession. This was June admitting that loving Johnny Cash was like stepping into an inferno, knowing you'd get burned, unable to stop yourself anyway. When Johnny heard it, he knew. He added the mariachi horns, that distinctive sound that made the song explode across the country. It became his biggest hit. Every time he performed it, he was singing June's secret to the world, and everyone knew it, except Vivian, sitting at home in California watching her marriage disintegrate in 3-minute intervals on the radio. By 1967, June had had enough. She was touring with Johnny, watching him destroy himself night after night. In a hotel room in Niagara Falls, she found him unconscious, barely breathing, surrounded by pills. She called his mother, Carrie Cash, sobbing into the phone. I can't do this anymore. I can't watch him die. Carrie Cash said something that changed everything. June, if you love him, you stay. You stay and you fight for him, because you might be the only person who can. So June stayed, but she made him a promise. I will help you get clean. I will stand by you, but I won't marry you until you're the man I know you can be, until you're whole again. Johnny Cash, broken and desperate, accepted her terms. He checked into a rehabilitation center. He fought through the withdrawals, the hallucinations, the overwhelming urge to give up. And June was there, every single day, reading scripture, holding his hand, believing in a version of him that he'd forgotten existed. The road back wasn't linear. There were relapses. There were midnight phone calls where June would find him in some hotel room, high again, apologizing through tears. But something had shifted. Johnny wasn't just trying to get clean for himself anymore. He was doing it for her, for the possibility of them. By early 1968, he was different, stronger, his eyes were clear, his performances were electric again. The At Folsom Prison album, recorded in January of that year, captured a Johnny Cash who had walked through fire and come out the other side. The inmates saw it, the world saw it, June saw it, but she still wouldn't marry him. 17 times he'd asked, 17 different ways, in private moments, in dressing rooms, once spontaneously in the middle of a car ride. Every time she'd smile, touch his face, and say, "Not yet." She needed to be sure that this version of Johnny was permanent, sure that she wasn't just another chapter in his chaos. It was driving him insane. Here he was, finally becoming the man she'd asked him to be, and she still wouldn't say yes. His band members would joke about it. "You conquered Folsom Prison, Johnny, but you can't conquer June." Then came the Canadian tour in February. They were promoting the Folsom Prison album. The audiences were electric. Every night, Johnny and June would perform together, their chemistry so obvious that people in the back rows could feel it. The way he'd look at her during Jackson, the way she'd laugh at his jokes between songs. They were a couple in everything but name. February 22nd started like any other show day. Sound check, interviews, the usual pre-show jitters. But Johnny was different, quieter. Marshall Grant, his bass player, noticed it first. "You okay, boss?" Johnny just smiled. "I'm about to do something stupid." He'd made a decision. 18 attempts in private had failed. Maybe it was time to try something public, something she couldn't ignore, something that would show her and the world exactly how serious he was. The plan was insane. He'd proposed during the show, in front of everyone, on live television. It was manipulative. It was romantic. It was vintage Johnny Cash, taking a risk so big that it could either make everything perfect or destroy everything completely. He didn't tell anyone. Not his band, not his manager, certainly not June. The London Gardens Arena was packed. 15,000 people. The show was being broadcast across Canada and parts of the United States. Johnny and June had done their duets. They'd killed. The audience was eating out of their hands. Everything was perfect. Then, as June started to walk off stage, Johnny called her back. "June, come here a minute." She turned, confused. This wasn't part of the show. In the wings, Luther Perkins and Marshall Grant exchanged glances. What was he doing? Johnny Cash stood there, guitar still strapped on, looking at June Carter like she was the only person in the building. 15,000 people disappeared. The cameras disappeared. It was just them. "I've been wanting to ask you this for a long time," he said, his voice steady but quiet. The microphones caught every word. June's eyes went wide. She knew. Oh God, she knew what he was about to do. "And I've asked you several times before, and you always said no." The arena had gone completely silent. You could hear people breathing. Somewhere in the audience, someone gasped. June stood there frozen. Her face was a mix of shock, terror, and something else. Something that looked like surrender. "But I'm asking you again," Johnny continued, "in front of all these people." He gestured to the crowd, but his eyes never left her face. "June, will you marry me?" Time stopped. The spotlight caught a tear rolling down June's cheek. Her hands were shaking. She opened her mouth, closed it again. For a moment it looked like she might run, might bolt off the stage and never look back. But then something shifted. You could see it happen. All those years of saying no, all those years of protecting herself, all those years of watching this man fight his demons, fall down, get back up and fight again. All of it collapsed into this single, crystalline moment. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, laughing through tears. "Yes." The arena exploded. 15,000 people erupted into screams and applause. Grown men were wiping their eyes. Women were sobbing. The camera crew, hardened professionals who'd seen everything, were grinning like idiots. Johnny Cash pulled June into his arms. They kissed on stage, and it wasn't a performance. It was real, raw. Years of tension, of longing, of fighting, of loving each other through hell and back, all condensed into that embrace. When they finally pulled apart, June was laughing and crying at the same time. "You did it in front of everybody," she said, half scolding, half amazed. "You actually did it." "I had to," Johnny replied, his voice barely audible over the applause. "You wouldn't say yes in private." The band kicked into an impromptu celebration. The audience wouldn't stop cheering. June kept looking at her hand like she expected a ring to materialize. Johnny couldn't stop smiling, this big, goofy grin that looked completely foreign on the face of the man in black. Backstage after the show, June's mother, Mother Maybelle Carter, shook her head in disbelief. "Well, I guess he finally wore you down, Junebug." June just laughed. "He didn't wear me down, Mama. He proved himself. There's a difference." They married on March 1st, 1968, just 1 week later, in a small ceremony in Franklin, Kentucky. Johnny wore black, June wore white. The wedding was simple, intimate, everything the proposal hadn't been. Their marriage lasted 35 years, not perfect years. Johnny would relapse occasionally. There would be fights. There would be times when June wondered if she'd made a mistake. But there would also be music, so much music. Tours around the world, duets that made people weep. A partnership that transcended the stage. June became Johnny's anchor. When the drugs called to him, she was there. When the darkness crept back in, she pulled him toward the light. She wasn't just his wife, she was his salvation, again and again, for decades. In 2003, June Carter Cash died of complications from heart surgery. Johnny was devastated. He performed at her funeral, his voice breaking as he sang. 4 months later, he was gone too. The doctors said it was complications from diabetes, but everyone who knew them understood the truth. Johnny Cash couldn't exist in a world without June. At his funeral, someone read a letter he'd written to June years earlier. "You're the object of my desire, the #1 earthly reason for my existence. I love you very much." 18 proposals, 35 years of marriage, a love story that changed country music forever. The proposal in London, Ontario wasn't just about Johnny Cash winning over June Carter. It was about a broken man becoming whole, about someone loving another person enough to say not yet until they were ready, about the courage it takes to ask for love in front of the world, knowing you might be rejected. June taught Johnny that love isn't just passion, it's patience. It's showing up every day. It's believing in someone when they can't believe in themselves. And Johnny taught June that sometimes taking a risk in front of 15,000 people is the only way to prove that you've changed, that you're serious, that you're all in. Their story reminds us that the greatest love stories aren't perfect. They're messy and complicated, and sometimes they take 18 attempts. But when you find someone worth fighting for, someone who makes you want to be better, you don't give up. You keep asking, you keep trying, you keep showing up. Because eventually, if you become the person they need you to be, they might just say yes. If this story touched you, if you believe in second chances and love that fights through the darkness, hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to become the person you're meant to be. And remember, the best love stories aren't the ones that start perfect. They're the ones where two broken people decide to be whole together. Now, go tell someone you love them, and mean it.